All right, we're getting down to brass tacks now. I've got all the panels made from the last video. I've got it kind of sitting in here, the last sort of fit up before I'm getting ready to tack it in place. I'm using minimal magnets this time because of what we learned about the magnets messing with the arc. So I'm probably gonna tack here and maybe here and then take these magnets away and then tack down there. You can see I've drilled some 1/8" holes right there to help me with my, my plug welds. And so we'll plug weld the bottom, we'll try to come up and seam weld around here, and then we'll bend this tab forward a little bit and then try to push it up onto there and just kind of tack it in a couple of places like it was. I think the fit up's not quite as great as it should be, but that's just what we got to deal with some of this old stuff. So we'll make it work out and then we'll move on to the next panel. And here it is all tacked in. Got a tack here, 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 another one here, and then I got a completed plug weld, right down there. So it's all tacked in, everything still looks good. So now I'm going to get to the business of finishing up these welds. Just a point to point out a little bit of a history lesson. This car seems to originally been blue, this kind of darker blue, and then it was repainted again. You can kind of see there's some yellow there. So it was blue, and then this kind of bright yellow, and then it was repainted this green. So, interesting. Here it is all finished up and seam welded. You got the seam right here, obviously, where I kind of tigged and it goes down in there. I haven't quite got this section yet. I'll get that from the other side. This went a lot smoother than when I tried to fix the rocker, mainly because I raised the car up on the lift and was able to actually use the pedal correctly, and it just helped a mediocre welder like me do a better job. The weld doesn't look like stacked dimes because I had gone back over in areas where it had some cold toes. I was going on the low side of temperature because I didn't want to blow through. I was a little scared, but it had some cold toes down here, which would make it harder when I come back with the flap wheel to smooth in. So I basically went back in areas where there was enough filler and kind of went back over it with the TIG torch to make the profile a little bit better. And then down here, there wasn't quite enough filler, and so what I went back and I made a second pass, which is why this is so big and chonky. So this should just help me out when I come back and smooth all this down to get it passable. You can see that I really burned some of the paint here. This is all in the door sill area, so not a big deal. I don't have this green color paint. I'm just gonna mask this off and do some black primer down here. So, you know, if you're looking for it, you'll see it, but it'll be mechanically solid. So now all I'm going to do is come back and TIG weld this piece right here, these two flanges together. I'll do that from the other side, and then I'll come in and I'll bend this tab up and just do some quick tacks to kind of piece that back together. Alright, I realized with this iPhone I can let you get back down in here behind the weld, so you can see this is the back side of what I just showed you. That's where I kind of welded it in and tacked the flange. Now this obviously didn't have any shielding gas, so you're going to see a lot of sugaring, which is, again, okay, it's fine, it'll survive. But what you can see is I got great penetration. You know, it welded to this relatively dirty metal pretty well, so I am very happy with that result. Right, now I've got the front patch panel in there. I didn't show the fit up on this. I just used a couple of the stitch weld magnets, and I had a little welding clamp from the inside to kind of hold it flush against this panel right here. I was able to get to these TIG welds, or these little tack welds, pretty easily with the TIG welder, and that all worked out well. And it's pretty thin right here, so that was definitely the right choice. Here I just was struggling to get the TIG torch in there at the right angle, and because this is so thin and this is actually just slightly thicker, I was starting to blow through. So I kind of just threw my hands up and went and got the little cheapy MIG and stuck it in there and just blasted a few plug welds in with a little cheap MIG, and it worked great. It didn't blow through, did its job, just holding it to the panel. So I'm gonna come back here, I'm gonna TIG weld along this seam. Then we're going to try to TIG weld right here to close that seam up, and then we're going to start prepping to put the cowl panel on, which will go right on there. And I think what I'm going to have to do is come up here, and where I was first learning how to use the spot weld drill tool, I went a little deep on these up near the top, so I'm probably going to come back in with the TIG and just fill that in repair this before I come back and put the cowl panel on. I've started to weld the seam here, which you can see right here. Things are going all right, not blowing through, but I've run into a problem because I made this fit up pretty tight, and everything looks good here, but as the heat's getting into the metal, it's starting to suck this piece up, and that is causing it to put pressure, on this piece. And if you look at it from the side, you'll see that now it's got kind of a bow to it, and I've already kind of worked on this a little bit with some clamps and things to try to get it back into place. But what's happening is, let's see if I can show you, what's happening is this piece right here, which was really tight before, has now overlapped, and it's being held there by a tack. So what I'm going to come do is go in and cut that tack, and then I'm going to pull these pieces apart and then try to file this edge down so it'll sit down nicely, because if I just keep welding here, this is just going to keep getting a bigger and bigger bow, and that's just not going to look good. So we'll give that a try. Alright, now I've got the whole seam welded up all the way from back here all the way down and then up this edge right here. You can see if I do the profile from the side, it's back to reasonably flat. This had arced considerably here because the metal was expanding down here as I was working this weld, and it was causing this to arc. So I did what I said. I cut the tack out, and then I came in and I kind of filed down this edge to relief it, and then that allowed enough room that I could kind of flatten this out. And what I did is I took this welding clamp right there and kind of squished it at the places where it had bowed and bent it back in place. So it's not perfect, but it's fine for this particular panel. So no real issues with anything blowing out, even down here on this tip right here. So that all went pretty well. I may clean this weld up a little bit, but you'll never see it once it's in the car because there's a big panel that goes right here, and so you'll never actually see that. On the side that you could still see, but it would be very hard to see, is here. Because this is an overhang weld, I really would have preferred to weld it from this side, but it would have been tougher. Preferred to weld it from this side because it would have ended up looking better than this backside weld we got here. But it worked out okay. I'll probably hit this with a soft pad and clean it up a little bit, and then maybe I'll put a little filler or something just to clean it up. But yeah, it turned out okay. So if we take a look back here, again, fabricated this panel, welded it in. Fabricated this panel, welded it in. Just need to come back and clean up the welds and fill in where I've taken material out from the different spot welds, and then we can put the cowl panel on. And I've come in and filled in where me cutting out the pinch welds kind of had eaten away a lot of material, right there and there, here, let's see, here, and up in here. Really not trying to do anything special, just kind of replace some of the material that was lost. I'll come back here and get this with a flap wheel just to get it to lay flat, but not trying to make it pretty, just trying to get it in. Here, these three look like piles of dog poop. I mean, I'm not even speaking facetiously. These look like small metal piles of dog poop. And mainly that's because this pinch weld piece of metal had something weird going on with it. I don't know what the heck the previous owner did, but it's been cut. You can see it's been cut all along here, and this piece of metal has already been well tortured. So when I came through and took the cowl panel off, it tortured it even more. So it's been blowing through, and I really had to come back and basically rebuild whole sections of this piece of metal with the TIG, which is why it looks so bad. I still need to go around the backside where it's cratered out and fill up to the level, and then I'm going to come back and work all this back down. All this, not because you're going to see it, but because I want to get it back to sturdy again so that I have a pinch weld to weld that cowl panel to. Now to get these welds to stop blowing through, basically what I did is I took this piece of aluminum, it's just a chunk of aluminum here, and I stuck it back there and I clamped it to it as tight as I could, which number one provides a little back shielding with the argon gas to keep it from escaping. Number two, it also kind of helps as a heat sink to prevent the heat from getting into this thin metal so quickly and then blowing away. I mean, it was still a struggle, obviously, but it made it possible. So I'm going to come in and fill behind these welds, and then I'm going to smooth these down with the flap wheel, and you should be good to go. Here's the after of cleaning up those welds. Down here I kind of just worked this with a hand file, just because, like I said, this has already been pulled through a press, and so the effective thickness of this metal is quite thin, and I don't really want to worry about hogging away some of this thin stuff while I was trying to flatten this out. So it may not look the best, but it is effectively flat. You can see where I was working this with a hand file there. Up here I did use the flap disc, but I did it very carefully, and I'll show you what I was talking about. If I put the caliper right kind of down here on the end of this, what you'll see is that all that's left there of this pinch weld is 020. So it is super thin, and I don't think this was 020 to begin with. It was probably closer to 040, 035, 040 being 20 gauge typically, but like I said, this pinch weld had something weird going on with it, and I didn't help by coming through and taking it off. So instead of, you know, trying to risk taking off this whole top cowl piece and replacing it, which I definitely do not want to do, what I did was I brought these welds down, but I didn't bring them all the way down like if you were trying to do like exterior body work. I left a little extra meat here, here, and here, and on the back side I did fill in the craters and I cleaned them up a little bit, but I left them essentially proud, because this is going to be hidden. Also, when I come back and I do my plug welds for the pinch weld, I'm going to shoot for this, this, and this, because I know there's more material there. I also know that this isn't really true yet, so you can see how all three of those things where I've hit them with the flap disc are now kind of at the same height. So even though they look like they're standing proud of this surface, they're actually fairly true to each other. Down here, I didn't even try to weld these because this is really bad and it's very close to the edge and there's not a lot of meat to work with. So I'm going to try to hit back this with the replacement cowl panel, and then just use these thin areas as plug weld starters and cross my fingers that works out. Otherwise, I may end up having to do like a seam weld or something like that, but we'll see how it goes. All right, a quick shot of prep before I go ahead and close up this panel. You can see I've done some of this white, kind of off-white primer, which is basically weld-through primer. I just put a thin coat on there, one coat, just to provide a little protection between the pinch welds. I don't like to use too much of it when I'm TIGging, just because of how sensitive the TIG process is to contaminants. It looks really incomplete down there, and it is, and that's because in areas where it's not going to be a pinch weld, I use some Eastwood rust encapsulator. So on this surface, and back down in the rocker, I actually painted on some rust encapsulator. So I really just didn't care about overspray because it's in a hidden area. So I just tried to get this on there. So I'm going to go ahead and take the tape off and hopefully go ahead and close up this cowl area. All right, here's the panel fitted up for the last time. I'm going to kind of go through and figure out where I'm going to drill my holes for my plug welds and how it's going to fit. It still fits pretty well. It's got some issues in certain places, but it's definitely going to work. So for instance, like down here, the original piece, this is the original profile right here. It kind of comes out at an angle, and this is more curved. And I think that's kind of how the original piece was, but there's not a whole lot here behind there. And so I'm going to have to put the plug weld kind of close to the edge. Either that, or I can do what they didn't want to do at the factory because it was too slow. And when I clamp it, I can just seam weld here, seam, seam. And then up here where there's more meat, that's an original body hole. I can just use that as a place to plug weld here, here. This is all fine to plug weld. Down here, maybe it's more apt to seam weld. And then down here, it actually turned out all right. Where I made the piece, it kind of flushes up right where it should. That little tab gets welded to this. If I come in here with clamps, this little gap right here actually closes up pretty well. So pat on the back to myself for that. That turned out okay. And then the only other place where it's a little bit of a question is right here. There's not much meat again between this original flange and this new piece. And so I could probably put a plug weld here and here, but like maybe right here, there's not as much of this behind that. And so again, I might end up just squeezing it together and doing a little seam right here, which obviously too slow and requires too much skill for the factory, but may be better in my case. So we'll get it all ready, cleaned up, fit it up, and then weld it on. All clamped up, cleaned up, all the holes drilled for the plug welds and ready to go pretty much. It took a lot of time getting this all straight because it's got to be flush and back. Make sure that there's no gaps there. As I said before, I'm going to do plug welds down here. It's all nice and tight. You can see how flush that is. I'm going to use that. Some more plug welds down here. I've got, let's see, sorry, that's bright. I got some holes drilled through there, so I'm going to plug weld from this side since I use gravity in my benefit here. Got those all clamped. Back here, as I had said before, no holes drilled for plug welds. I am just going to clamp that and then seam weld it, at least partially seam weld it all the way down. So now that it looks like it's got good fit up, I'm going to start working. I'm probably going to work from the bottom up. The bottom is a little bit more critical because if you recall, the bottom has this really small place that has like one spot for a plug weld, and that needs to be right flush up against that body panel. So I'll probably start down here or somewhere down there and work my way up, pulling things, and then I'll pull and adjust these two pinch welds together to get the final alignment as I work my way up. So we'll see what it looks like after it's done. All right, it's all welded in. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere anytime soon. Just do a quick debrief or lessons learned or hot wash, whatever you want to call it, wherever you come from. So a lot of plug welds. I hadn't done a whole lot of this type of welding before, where you're trying to replicate a spot weld or a pinch weld. So I kind of learned as I went along. So maybe I'll give you some tips. What I had seen recommended was to do an 1/8 inch hole in the top piece of metal, depending on which part of the curve was on. I did some of the original holes here, but on this side I did the original holes down here. 1/8 inch is the reason they're saying an 1/8 is because what you really want to do is you want to heat the metal up and get the metal liquid on the bottom of the hole before the sides of the hole. But if you make the hole too big, you risk blowing it out. So what I found is that you really need to clamp the two pieces together. They need to be touching. And then you want to get a small tungsten and you want to sharpen it real sharp. And you want to get the tip of that tungsten down in the hole so the arc is only striking the back piece of the metal. And it's getting it nice and hot. And then once you're sure you've got the bottom piece of metal or the back piece of metal molten, then you back the tungsten out and you quickly put some wire in there, put some welding rod in there. And what that does is it ensures that the actual metal kind of adheres down there, because as soon as you pull that tungsten out, it's going to jump to the edge of the hole and it's going to melt that. And if you don't get the bottom molten, then you won't get good penetration. Alternatively, if you start too far out, you can also end up blowing a hole. So for instance, this one went really well. You can kind of see that it's, if it'll focus, you can kind of see that it ended up really nicely. Focus. Focus. It ended up pretty polite. And this one was a problem. This one started to blow out. and I ended up having to, oh, there we go. This one was a nice one, this one was a nice one. This one started to blow out a little bit and I had to chase it. So just me learning. So there's your advice. 1/8 inch hole, try to get right up in there and get that back piece of the metal nice and molten before you stick your rod in, and then you ended up getting pretty good results like this one here, this one here, this one here, all turned out real nice. I did the same technique up here, except I did it from this side. This metal was all janky, so these are the previous welds that I had done to fix the metal. That's why those look like that. That one was on a piece of virgin metal, so that's why it looks a lot nicer. I added a little seam weld here just to give it a little more strength. And then down here, similarly, plug welds. Here there was the hole already in the body panel, and here's the seam where I had made my original piece. This is where I fabbed up the replacement panel. This is the original. I just came in here and welded it there. As I said here, I did a couple of seam welds instead of plug welding because there wasn't as much meat back here. These seam welds aren't very pretty. Again, it was kind of upside down and just an odd position, and I'm not that great of a welder, so my weld quality suffers when I'm out of position. It's a different story around the back here. If you can kind of see, I've got seam welds back here as well. So I've got plug welds down here, just like on the front. Then I started doing seam welds again because I didn't think I had enough. It's not focusing. Didn't think I had enough meat to do plug welds. So you can kind of see that the TIG welds or the seam welds look a lot better back here. This looks like it should, and you know, I'm sure some better TIG welder will tell me that it's crap, but these actually look all right, and that's mainly because I was able to be a little more comfortable, use some clamps to rest my hand on, and that ended up with a better result. But regardless, the piece is on. We fixed the rust in the inner rocker, we fixed the rust in the outer rocker, we fixed the rust at the bottom of the cowl panel, we've replaced this panel, so it's a long story, but we're finally kind of back up to even where we started, and we've stopped digging ourselves a hole.